Hello, everyone. It's Sunday night, and we have now entered week 11 of the semester, and we are beginning the final work of the semester, Shakespeare's tragedy, King Lear. To prepare us for this reading, I've assigned a web lecture on the Elizabethan theatre, and what I'm hoping is that this lecture will introduce you to the physical space of Shakespeare's theatre, the Globe, but also to the cultural context of the play, and will also tell you a little bit about where that theatre came from. And in terms of the reading, you'll be reading Act One of King Lear. For those of you who find Shakespeare challenging to read, I have a recommendation. And the recommendation is really very simple. Watch a film or get an audio version of the play and watch it or listen to it as you read it. Now, you won't find that, especially in a film version, that every line is identical or that every line is even there, because oftentimes films compress Shakespeare's original plays. But it will give you a good overall understanding of the play. One of the things that I like so much about seeing and hearing a Shakespeare play is that the meaning of the lines is much clearer, right? Much more immediately clear, because the actors understand what they're saying, right? They've already made it through they've struggled through the language, and they've taken it and made it something that makes sense to them. And so when they deliver the lines, right, those lines also make sense to us. I think this will help you enormously, and I also think you'll enjoy seeing some of the different versions of King Lear. I think of King Lear primarily as a family play, but of course it's also much more than that. It's a play about the mystery of human life in its confrontation with the wild and inexplicable forces of good and evil. And if we had a year or a lifetime, we might look at this play in great detail. We might look at the way it treats human suffering, at the bestial within humanity, the primacy of passion, the lovely problem of self-discovery, regeneration, human cruelty towards other human beings, the perversion of love, the destruction of love, and the redemptive power of love. We might investigate the paradoxes of seeing in blindness and reasoning in madness. We might look at the Machiavellian version of political reality the play gives to us. We might think about the play as an apocalypse. We might think about the monstrosity that Shakespeare calls nothing. As it is, we will only touch very briefly on these ideas, always with one large question in our minds. Is this a play about the destruction of the world? Or is this a play about the triumph of humanity over these horrors? Despite the vastness of the play and the vastness of the questions raised by Lear, the play begins in a strangely intimate space, the space of the family, and it's a space that we know. Family issues dominate the play, less a reflection of the political world than they are the genesis of that very world. Conversations about kingdom are repeatedly interrupted and displaced by those that thrust family rivalry, specifically sibling rivalry, sibling competition for a father's love, to the center of the stage. In the opening scene, which really, when you think about it, is a very strange opening scene, the presence of Edmund and the subject of his bastardy versus Edward's legitimacy usurp Gloucester and Kent's anxieties about the forthcoming division of Lear's kingdom. Look closely at the exchange between these two earls. What kind of wordplay is involved here? And after this brief exchange about sons and their fathers, we have the competition among the king's three daughters. That again usurps political issues and reduces the kingdom to a prize within the family game of who loves the parent most, a game which all of us who grew up with siblings understand all too well. The organization of the Elizabethan family and the society it mirrored was like our own, patriarchal and patrilineal, but much more intensely so. This means that authority and kinship were transmitted through the father. Unlike the contemporary family, though, the Elizabethan family transferred inheritance through what's called primogeniture, a design that allowed the family to maintain material power intact by passing it exclusively through the firstborn male child. It's important to know this because, of course, this feeds into the part of Edgar and Edward. The world of King Lear, then, is not only a patriarchal world, but a world of asymmetrical distribution and polarization that divides like-gendered siblings, wife and husband, and fathers from children of either sex. In Lear, you might have noticed, there are no mothers. Instead, there are two fathers, a double plot symmetry that places that was a cat, that places two families, one consisting of fathers and daughters, one consisting of fathers and sons, into mirror images. In each of the two plots, the children are divided into starkly archetypal categories of good and bad. In both plots, the fathers initially love their good child best, the youngest daughter and the eldest son. But then disastrously they reverse their judgment, disinherit and cast out the good child, and in anger endow the bad ones. Also in both, however, supplanting the favored child and getting all the father owns leaves the unfavored ones still unsatisfied. Nothing, after all, could satisfy them. And after they have acquired all, the evil children turn from the rationally explicable goal of self-acquisition to an irrational lust for power and love, really, right? Because love is really behind all of this, that leads them to do violence against the father, to seek the destruction of the sibling who has already been dispossessed, and in the Lear plot, to destroy each other. The play's repeated qualifications of more and less, all and nothing, accumulation and dispossession, continually rephrase the point that power to bestow or abate, enlarge or scant, whether measured by size of a kingdom or the number of knights, represents at its most basic level the power to confer or withhold love. Lear's pelican daughters, Gloucester's bastard son, have an insatiable greed for power, inheritance, and title that masks by implication a set of far more primal, inarticulate needs lurking below the surface of the text. Ultimately, the needs of the unloved and illegitimate express themselves in inverted forms of desire aimed symbolically against the very act of fathering. They thrust the father outside the gates of the house and kingdom and drain him of all he possesses. But they go further. Goneril and Regan violently, symbolically castrate Lear's authority by cutting off his knightly train and emasculating his image of virility. Edmund delivers Gloucester, his father, over to blindness. And eventually, in a kind of psychologically charged mixing of plot and subplot, Edmund seeks to kill Lear, and Regan seeks to maim Gloucester, as the unstable rage of the neglected children overwhelms the play and vents itself indiscriminately upon the world of fathers. Once upon a time, there was a great king who had 3 daughters, and 3 is a wonderful, magical, archetypal number, the youngest of whom he loved best. One day he decided to find out if they loved him in return, so he summoned them together to ask, "How much do you love me?" Even if you have never read King Lear before, you might still be able to guess at its outcome, for what happens in it has happened before in fairy tales far more ancient than this play, or even on the old Lear play upon which it is partially based. Like old fairy tales, moreover, Lear unfolds in a primitive, almost prehistoric setting with a feudal social structure. But Shakespeare's exploration of the good-bad child motif, an archetypal motif, goes far beyond the stark archetypal dichotomy of the fairy tale, even as it draws on it. What are some of its fairy tale elements, though? The extremely old and perverse king, the primeval setting, the daughter too good to be true, the sisters too wicked to be believed, the despised or ill-bred or adopted child. How does Lear depart from the traditional fairy tale? The most obvious difference, of course, is the ending of the play. The happily ever after of fairy tales is unavailable here, and instead the ending is almost unbearably painful, savage, and filled with pathos. It also departs from the formula in another important, though less noticeable way. Unlike the usual fairy tale, which focuses on the fate of the child or children, Lear focuses on the fate of the rejecting parent. As an adult fairy tale, Lear locates the psychological and sexual interest in the parent, who must endure hardship in order to overcome or resolve internal conflicts. Let us follow the sons of the subplot for a moment before returning to the daughters of the primary plot. We know already that sons are in a difficult position vis-à-vis their fathers. And we also know that on the one hand, the son's struggle with individuation is legitimate. He must grow up and be able to take power from the father. At the same time, this taking of power involves the threat of usurpation. Gloucester's immediate willingness in Act 1, Scene 2, to believe that his firstborn and favored son Edgar secretly contemplates patricide is understandable when placed in the context of the father-son myths that prophesy it. Both sons, Edmund and Edgar, despite their radical differences in character, follow the same basic pattern. Having been cast out by the father and displaced by the rival brother, each struggles violently to get back into the family enclosure and inherit the privileges of the father, his name, his title, and everything that by the law of primogeniture structurally precludes the possibility of brotherly love and sets up the fratricidal rivalry that this tragedy plays out. Notice the closeness of their names, Edgar, Edmund. Shakespeare links them even as he severs them. And now back to the daughters. The two wicked daughters, Goneril and Regan, are bound together by their names as well as their needs. Regan is an abbreviated anagram of Goneril. Cordelia, on the other hand, stands alone and carries a name that allusively suggests the heart. Unlike the favored son, what the daughter who has been loved tangibly needs from the paternal storehouse is actually best expressed by Cordelia's nothing. What she needs is not an appropriation of her father's name or title, but in fact a release from that name and household. She needs permission from her father to pass out of his hands and out of his bounds. Think, if you will, of the standard church service for a marriage. It has actually changed very little since Shakespeare time. The ceremony is, of course, not only a ceremony of union, but it is also a ceremony of separation, the separation of a daughter from her parents, especially her father. It is a ritual, and it is also a paradigm of all the conflicts that define the father-daughter bond. What it authorizes is not only, as it might seem, the transfer of a passive female subject from one male to another. The ritual is, instead, a communal coercion of the father that forces him to deliver his untouched daughter as a gift to the rival male, who stands at her other side. Once he does so, the ritual script forces him to acknowledge that his role in her life has effectively ended. He must watch her forsake his name and the family he governs as she transfers her commitment to love and honor his replacement. If Cordelia seemed hard-hearted to you at first, if her desire to give nothing to her poor old father seems strange and unnatural, think again about what Lear is asking for, what Lear is really attempting to do, and why his request is not so harmless as it seems, becomes clearer once the significance of Cordelia's impending marriage is taken into account. The pledges demanded by her father would psychologically invalidate the vows she gives to her husband, nullifying the daughter's separation from the father and reconstructing it into a return to the father. When Cordelia defines the contradiction in her father's seemingly harmless request for love, she illustrates it in her sister's statements and then links the plight of the unwed daughter who owes obedience to the father to the plight of troth, betrothal, designed to resolve in the wedding. Why have my sisters husbands if they say they love you all? Happily, when I shall be wed, that Lord whose hand must take my plight shall carry half my love with him, half my care and duty. Sure I never marry like my sisters, to love my father all. What Cordelia's impending marriage has forced Lear to face, and what the aged and widowed king is trying to forestall, is the very human fear of crawling toward death alone, unloved and without family. It is the desire to prevent this threat that motivates him to call together his whole family and attempt to bind to him not only the loved child who is about to depart, but even the two unloved children who have already separated from him and owe primary loyalties to their husbands. Sorry, a cat intervened. The game Lear orchestrates betrays his desire to re-enclose all three daughters within the psychic territory of paternal rule. It is an understandable but also an extremely manipulative move. Goneril and Regan's greed to acquire material signs of their father's love prompts them to pledge themselves in all but incestuous terms. Look at their lines. They acquire a dowry that by uniting them with their father, however disharmoniously, severs them from their husbands and from their marriages. I have a very helpful cat tonight. To put this another way, Lear offers his two married daughters a dowry that unmarries them. To Cordelia's dowry, he has attached terms designed either way to prevent her from marrying. For Cordelia to accept the dowry would negate her marriage. To refuse it leaves her dowerless and hence unable to wed. Lear paradoxically casts her away and disinherits her, not to let her go, but to prevent her from going. And if we think about Lear's gift to his other daughters, there is another flaw at the heart of the gift. Does Lear really intend to give up power, to let youth succeed age, as it must? No, his bequest of the state is not the transfer of rule it purports to be, for the self-deposed king intends to retain all of his monarchical power. Lear then violates both spheres of patriarchal authority, and from this scene, scene 1 on, inverted images of Lear's paternal relation to his daughters and his kingdom pervade the drama, especially through the king's ceremonial invocations of sterility against the daughters he has generated and the land he has ruled. The king's love is dangerously retentive, dangerously unnatural. Towards the close of that scene, Lear reveals his regressive, if not absolutely transgressive plans to set his rest on, as he says, Cordelia's kind nursery, an image in which the father has imaginatively returned to infancy and pictures himself nursing from his daughter, a sublimation that absorbs the father's guilty desires into the infant's subconsciously Oedipal desires and reestablishes the father's incestuous proximity to the daughter. Does Cordelia escape from this paternal absorption? I leave that question as an open one. For myself, I would have to answer no. Her departure with France, now as the Queen of France, seems to break that pattern of circularity that holds the daughter in family bondage. But when Cordelia reappears at the end of the play, and she describes her life with her husband as one of mourning and importunate tears for the father to whom she is still psychologically bound, we know it has not worked. And here it becomes tragically apparent that Lear's refusal to obey the ritual and give up his daughter has effectively negated the daughter's natural pattern and enclosed her in the family. The final scene, beautiful as it is, also stages the most sterile of family images: a dead father with his 3 dead daughters, the wheel having come full circle, back to echo the opening scene. And there you have it, King Lear, a family play. Of course it is this and many other things. That was Lecture 1. Now you can go back and read Act 1, and we'll go from there. I look forward to your responses this week, and of course I look forward to your questions as always. I trust that by now you're working quite a bit, really dividing your time equally between our readings and your final project. And as always, I'm standing by for your questions and to help you in any way I can. Please be in touch, and I will be too. Take good care.